Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Holacek, Ukrainian-American philosopher and historian. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Eye on Ukraine. You know by now the aim of this show. It's meant to introduce you to Ukrainian history, Ukrainian culture, and with the war in Ukraine persisting for over 3 years now, the focus of the show has been on the war. And the idea behind this show is to give you a little bit of the historical backdrop of events, where other shows talk about events in the Ukrainian war and critically comment on them. The aim of this show is to give you a sort of a fuller view, fuller understanding of just what's going on in the Ukrainian war. For that to occur, there has to be some understanding of the historical backdrop that I mentioned. So, again, today I want to look at Putin's parade. Now, it's commonly known that Russia celebrates the Great Patriotic War on May 9th, whereas other countries involved in the war celebrated on May 8th. And Ukraine itself wants to celebrate the end of World War II on May 8th to align itself more with Western interests and pull itself away to Russia. It's a very important symbolic gesture on Ukraine's part, and one that certainly has got the ire of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Anyways, Putin has demanded, he has asked for, but it really amounts to a demand for a 3-day ceasefire so he can celebrate this Victory Day parade, this great parade that they have every year. Now, this parade is more important than ones in the past because in effect, it is celebrating Putin's 25th anniversary, 25 years as president of Russia. More than that, it comes at a time where his army is reeling. The economy is completely destroyed. It's annihilated. It's not decimated. It's annihilated. And he can't go on much longer. There's the possibility there are revolts within the army. There are small scale uprisings that don't get much publicity among the population because of the state of the economy. People can't buy food. They can't have children. It's too expensive to live. There's no medical care. People can't afford to buy apartments. They can't afford cars. Only the very wealthy people can manage in Putin's economy. So things are going in such a spiraling downward in such a rapid direction that the war can't go on for much longer. So this parade is of a special importance to Putin because it showcases, it gives him time, right? It's going to showcase the greatness of the Russian military and show that whatever perceptions you may have by looking at YouTube, those of you who can get onto the internet and get away from official propaganda of Russian TV, things are really going swimmingly. Putin wants to show Russians and the rest of the world. Now, the leaders of other non-Western nations in the world clearly know that things aren't going well. The war has proven to be a complete debacle. He was supposed to go into Ukraine and move into Kiev in no time at all, in a matter of days, perhaps in a matter of weeks. And now it's been 3 years later, and things are going rather poorly. Soldiers are using motorcycles, donkeys, any sorts of animals, and so forth, to continue the war. Crippled people are returned to the front line, and there's a great problem with getting conscripts to fight the war. There's a great lack of motivation for Russian soldiers to fight the war. A lot of prisoners the prisons in Russia are emptied. These soldiers are fighting the war. There's the problem of surcease of the war. What happens when the war ends? Putin is in no position to end the war. I say a couple reasons. One, if the war were to end, he'd have to face the problem of a dying Russian economy, conversion of an economy that is militarily based to one that is focused on providing food and other essentials for daily living, which is just not happening right now in Russia. So the longer that the war continues, the more that the base, more that the economic base deteriorates, and Russian people just won't be able to live anymore. And that's happening rather quickly, I should say. Um, so we can't end the war, you know, or you'd have all sorts of problems going on. So that is not something that's going to happen. He wants to continue the war. This parade is very, very important for him, just to showcase just how great Russia still is. Now, what Putin did when he came into power, he, as I say um, in my book, yet to be published, Putin's obsession with Ukraine, what Putin did shortly thereafter, his uh, his coming to power, right, his first in his first year as president of Ukraine, year 2000, is in a matter of a few years push Russia away from Westernization and turn it toward a more Eastern orientation or a more isolated tack, as it were. He listened rather cleverly to the Russian people who were weakened and wearied over hearing Gorbachev and to a lesser extent Yeltsin talk about the misdeeds and crimes of the Soviet past, specifically Joseph Stalin, who, as we know, wound up uh, killing some 3 million Ukrainians in Holodomor, the death by starvation in 1932, 1933, and other atrocities that occurred in his throughout his new economic policies, which aimed to modernize Russian industry, which aimed to turn Russian agrarianism into a sort of industrial pattern, to use industrial mold or pattern, and industrialize um, farming so that there would be many farms collectivized into one. Um, Soviet overseer to see to that the farms are moving efficiently. You want to come up, Jeff? Come on. No. And oops, come on, come on. And overall, there were some successes in the cities, in the urban areas, but not so much in the rural areas. Collectivization in the Ukrainian farms, especially, occurred after much of the Ukrainian population lesson had been learned. You either collectivize or you all die, or something like that. At least that was the threat. Now, so excuse me, Putin was wise enough to say, forget this lamentation, these uh, cries about how bad the Soviet Union was, and let's look at the greatness of the Soviet Union. Russia as a country has had a great history. At least Putin thinks, or he says this, he promulgates this view. And he goes back to Ivan III, who was much of a diplomat, Ivan IV, his grandson, who was very sanguinary Tsar. We look at Peter the Great, right, in the early 1700s, and then later Catherine II, Catherine the Great, and the gradual, and sometimes not so gradual, expansion of Russia becoming an empire, and the notion of the Russian leader not as a president or someone presiding over a land, but a Tsar, which came from the word for Caesar, Kaiser, the Latin term. So this whole notion that Stalin was just an incurably evil person, Putin is wise enough to acknowledge that to some extent, but he also says, but look, he was the person that won the great patriotic war, World War II for Russia. And without Russia's accomplishments in World War II, the world would be overrun with Nazis. Hence his preoccupation of the Nazis in Ukraine. All the time says that all the time. On August 23, 1939, the Soviet Union and Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which ultimately is an agreement, an accord between the Soviet Union and Germany, with each country carving up some parts of Europe for its own benefit. The USSR was supposed to acquire Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, and Bessarabia. And everything was going somewhat swimmingly. Germany invades Poland shortly thereafter, a couple of weeks after that. And Germany and the Soviet Union carve up Poland. And then, surprise, surprise, a couple of years later, in 1942, 1941, Germany invades the USSR. And then September 8, 1942, there's a siege of Leningrad. Um, and so things aren't going so bad. So what's missing here from Putin's historical recapitulation, as it were, is this whole notion of the deviousness of Joseph Stalin and the fact that he had an accord with Hitler. The fact that the Russians did fight against the Nazis, you know, towards the latter years of World War II was due to the fact that Hitler went against his word and attacked Russia, and Russia was forced into the war without question. He talks about this great patriotic war. This is such an important war for Vladimir Putin. And the parade here is an attempt for him to showcase the greatness of Russia again. While everything around him is falling apart, he can have this great military parade to show just how great Russia is. And that's the point here. That's what he's trying to accomplish by this parade. Now, will the parade go on? We know that Zelensky has some of the leaders of the Ukrainian nation have proposed that those who attend ought to bring earplugs because there might be violence. And Zelensky has gone on record to say that those who attend the parade, these are legitimate military targets. And don't be surprised if we see Ukrainian military aggression to disrupt the parade. Now, I doubt that Zelensky is going to do anything uh, of such a sort, but it's a brilliant move on his part. It's a diversionary tactic, a diversionary technique to get people of other foreign dignitaries afraid to go to Moscow and attend this great parade. And it is also a tactic by Zelensky that attempts to draw away resources from the battlefield and put them encircling Moscow so that there has to be success there in protecting all the people in the parade. Just what's going to be paraded, how many soldiers will have to be diverted, we'll have to wait and see. Will this parade be a success? Uh, I think it'll probably go on without incident, but I would not be surprised to see Ukraine bombing other parts of Russia or disrupting other parts of Russia to create turmoil. I wouldn't be surprised to see um, bombs going off near the parade so that these can be heard. You know, drone bombs going off, drones flying into buildings or something near enough to the parade for these noises to be heard and so forth. But we'll have to wait and see. Who knows what's going to go on? So again, this parade is absolutely crucial for Vladimir Putin. It buys him time, right? It's a way of saying, look, everything's going just fine in the war. We need to be patient. Putin's fate is sealed. I don't see him being in power for more than 6 months. A lot of people disagree with that. I just think the economy is too bad and things will turn. The soldiers will turn on him. People will turn on him. Something has to happen. There needs to be a change of leadership. Will there be a more hawkish president of Russia replacing Putin? I don't know. Or someone more inclined towards Iranic policies, peaceful policies. One can only hope, but the good first step would see Putin removed from power. And once removed from power, he will likely be exterminated because that's what happens to Soviet and Russian leaders who fail to do the job, who make promises and can't keep the promises. So overall, for Putin, this war has been a catastrophe, right? in attempting to showcase the great Russian military. Uh, he is shown to the world that Russia is a paper tiger, that Russia is nothing really to concern oneself with. This is in accord with what I have called Putin's muscular militarism, turning away from lamenting the fact that Stalin did so many bad things in showcasing Stalin's brilliance when it came to military matters. And this is what Putin does. His muscular militarism is a matter, this is my term, it's a matter of focusing on Russia's greatness. And for Putin, it's essentially and exclusively a greatness when it comes to military affairs, when it comes to military tactics, when it comes to war and taking over countries. Because Russia is not a nation, right? With borders. Russia is a nation with ever expanding borders. That's what Russia is. I say in my book, Ukraine, The Deep Roots of a Young Nation, no nation on earth has ever been so obsessed with expanding its borders as Russia has been. Anyways, we'll see what happens with the parade. We'll come on and talk about that later after it occurs and see what happens. But I do think Ukraine will cause some shit. Shit will happen. So it's a matter of waiting and seeing what happens. And for that, we can only wait till the parade occurs and what happens. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the show. We'll do this again soon. TTFN.